Welcome to Daily Tutorials. Today we're gonna start off with a brief introduction to HTML, then we're gonna move on to set up our environment. So let's get started. First thing you need to know that HTML is so easy to learn. Most people learn it in 1 week or 2. Second, HTML is fundamental. You cannot be a web developer without learning HTML. To work with HTML, we're gonna use VS Code or Visual Studio Code. To download Visual Studio Code, you need to Google VS Code. Next, we're gonna select the first link, and here you have a selection between different operating systems, and just select, and we're gonna see that a file just started downloading, and the installation of VS Code is so simple. Now I have VS Code open here. This is our home page. First thing we're gonna do is we're gonna select file, open folder. Here in desktop, I'm gonna create a folder and call it HTML intro. Select file, and here to our left there is a plus button. Select it, and here we're gonna call it index.html, and that's how we created our first file. First thing, let's start with an open bracket, an exclamation point, doc type HTML. Now this first line here informs the browser that this is an HTML5 page. Next, we have an HTML element. An HTML element consists of, on the left, an opening tag, and on the right, a closing tag. The difference, the closing tag has a slash before the element name. Now, let's move on. Let's open this. And HTML contains two basic elements, which are head, which contain all the information about the page, and body, which contain the whole page, paragraphs, images, everything. Let's see two examples. For head, for example, we can start with the title element, which let's call it our website. And for body, we can have like the p tag. This is the paragraph element, and we can have text in it. Now, to check this in the browser, there is an extension for VS Code, which works very well, which is called Live Server. To get it, you just need to head to the extension and write Live Server. Here it is. Just has to install it. That's all. Now let's go back to our page. Let's click the right button. Open with Live Server. And here we have our page. Now we can see here in the tab, you can see our website, which is derived from our head, where we added that title, and here is our paragraph here. First, you need to know that heading tags range from H1 to H6, H1 being the biggest in size. Now here we have H1 to H6 with the content of HTML course. Let's check them in the browser. Here you can see that this is H1 and this is H6. The thing you need to know that search engine takes into consideration H tags to know what the page is all about. So always use the H1 for your big titles and the H2 to H3 for subtitles, and so on and so on. Attributes add an additional information to the element, either styling, providing information to the browser, or to the search engines. Now let's check a couple examples. Here we're gonna add an H1. We're gonna put our HTML course. Let's check it in the browser. Here we have our H1. Now we're gonna add an attribute to center this H1, and attributes always placed in the opening tag. So now we're gonna start by the name of the attribute, a line. We're gonna add an equal sign. Next we're gonna put quotes, and we're gonna write center here. Now let's check it in the browser. Yes, we see here that our heading is centered. So let's go back. Let's just do something else. Now let's put right here. Let's check it again. Here we have our H1 on the right. Attributes also used to pass information to the browser or to the search engine, like let's go to our HTML element. Now I'm gonna put add, I'm gonna put length equal quotes, and we put en. And this means that our HTML page is in English, and the browser and the search engine is gonna treat it as an English written page. Something else, attributes are, you can add as many attributes to your elements as you want. There is no limit. First, let's put p, and we have our p tag here, and inside we're gonna use a built-in extension called lorem to generate random text. So first we're gonna write LOREM, and then we're gonna add how many words do we need. Let's say 45, and just hit tab or enter. Let's check the browser. Here we have our paragraph. Now let's say we want to break it into different lines. Now let's try through the IDE. So let's break it here, here. Now let's check it in the browser. And as we can see here, nothing happened. So the only way to break a paragraph into different lines in HTML is through the BR or the break tag. So BR. Let's do another one here. Let's do another one here. Now let's check it in the browser. And here we can see that we broke our paragraph into lines. Next, we're going to talk about 3 different elements that can be included in the paragraph tag, which are the emphasize tag, the bold tag, and the strong tag. Now, these 3 elements' function is to provide information to the search engine. For example, now let's just say that we want this word here to be bold. Just need to add this word inside this p tag. Now let's check it in the browser. Here we can see that ipsum here is bold, and it just serves to tell the search engine that this word is important. Now let's put this word into the emphasis tag. So em, let's take this word and put it inside, and this tells the search engine that this word is the most important. So let's check it in the browser. You see here it's in italic. And last we have the strong element. Let's try it on this word. So now let's check it in the browser. Here we have it's also bold here. Now all these elements should not be used in styling your paragraphs. It's just to provide information to the search engines. Only CSS should be used in styling. First, we're gonna start with bracket, image, emg, and close the bracket. We actually can add a closing tag, but it's insignificant. So now we're gonna add a source, s or c equal, and here I have an image, Real Madrid logo in the same folder as the HTML file. So Real Madrid underscore Madrid.png. You always need to add the format. Now let's check this in the browser. Here we have our logo. Now we're gonna add another attribute. This attribute called alternative. So alt equal quotes. This attribute adds a description for the image in case the image is not loading because of a server problem or a computer problem or the internet connection. So we're gonna add Real Madrid logo. Now let's try something else. Let's try to copy this tag. Let's see how it's gonna show in the browser. Here we have the two images next to each other, and images always gonna be next to each other as long as there is a space. Now let's say you want the second image to be in the next line. What we're gonna do is we're gonna use the break tag, which is br. It also doesn't have a closing tag, so let's check the browser. And here you can see the second image went to the second line. Now let's add some other attributes. You can add the height attributes. Let's make it 300 pixels. You can also add the width attribute for the width, and let's make it 400 pixels. Now let's check the browser. Here we see that our image just changed its size. One more thing, we can actually add an image from the internet, so using a link. So let's go to the browser. We have here, let's start Real Madrid images. Let's pick an image, open image in new tab. We have our picture here, copy the link, and let's go back to let's delete this, and let's put our link. Now let's check the browser. Here you can see that the image changed to our link. First, I'm gonna put an A, and for the attribute href, we're gonna put news.html, which is a file I've created in the same folder at the index.html. And we're gonna add another anchor tag, so A, and here in the href attribute we're gonna put the official link to the FIFA website. Now here inside the first anchor tag we're gonna put the news link. Inside the second anchor tag we're gonna put FIFA. Now let's check our browser. Let's click on the first link. Here's our news page. Now let's go back. Now let's check the FIFA website. And here's our FIFA website. There is another function for the anchor tag. Let's put a paragraph here. Let's put random text. Let's put like 1,000 words. And in the end, we're gonna add an anchor tag. But this time the anchor tag is gonna bring us to the top of the page. Now, let's put number sign here. And let's add up here. Now, let's check it in the browser. Here is our page. Let's go to the bottom, and here is our up. Now let's click, and here it gets us to the top of the page. Now there is more things we can check for the anchor tag. For example, instead of this, we can put an H1. Let's call it the news page, and instead of FIFA we can add an image. So and here for the source attribute, I actually have a picture in the same folder. So FIFA.png. Now let's check it into the browser. Here I have the FIFA picture. I'm gonna click on it. And it leads us to the FIFA website. Now let's go back. Here is our H1. And this is our news page. One last thing we can add for the anchor tag is the target attribute. Target attribute underscore blank, and this is used in case you want your link to be opened in a new tab. Now let's check the browser. Here our link, the new page, the news page, and it's open in a new tab. You can see it like it. First, let's put an UL, and inside UL we're gonna have our items inside an li tag, which means list items. So this is our first item. Let's add 12 more items, and we're gonna populate our list with front-end languages, so HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, JS. Let's check the browser. Here we can see our list with the dot before each item. So let's go back and see how we can change that. Now let's copy our list. We're gonna have 3 more. Now let's go to the first one. We're gonna type equal. Let's put disk the first, and for the second we're gonna put none, and for the third we're gonna put circle, and for the fourth we're gonna put square. Type square. Now let's check our browser, and here we can see that disk didn't change anything, and the second one, this is for the none, it took everything away. Third, you can see an empty circle before our items, and the fourth, it's a square before our items. Now let's go back to the VS Code. Now we're gonna try a nested list. So here in front of CSS, gonna add well. Let's open here. We're gonna have 2 items. So LE for item 1 and another for item 2. Here we're gonna put part 1, and for the second we're gonna put part 2. Now let's check out the browser, and here we have part 1 and part 2 as a sub list for the CSS. First thing, we're gonna put an OL for ordered list. Here we open, and our items are going to be inside a tag called li for list items. Li. Now I'm gonna add 3 more, and we're gonna put Serie A teams by ranking. So Inter, AC Milan, Juventus, and Atlanta. Now let's check the browser, and here we can see that our list is numbered, and that's the difference between an ordered list and an ordered list. And here the order of the items actually matters. So let's go back to the VS Code, And now we're gonna add an attribute type for the ordered list, which controls the way the list is ordered. I'm gonna put a 1 here, and that's actually the default. So I'm gonna copy this list and do 4 more. And for the second one, I'm gonna put an uppercase A, and for the third, I'm gonna put a lowercase a, and for the fourth, I'm gonna put an uppercase I, and for the fifth, I'm gonna put a lowercase I. And now let's check what happens. So here our default, and here second one is for the uppercase A, here for the lowercase a, and the fourth for the uppercase Roman numerals, and for the fifth is the lowercase Roman numerals. So let's go back to VS Code. Now let's go to the first list, and we're gonna add another attribute, which is start. And here we're gonna decide at which number the list starts. So let's put 3, for example. Now let's check the browser, and here we can see that our list numerals just changed. It's starting from the number 3, and we can do that for the other ones too. So let's say we want it to start from C. So start and 3. Now let's check the browser, and here we can see our list starts from the C. First, let's create the description list so we can see how it looks like. So let's start with DL for description list, DT for terms. Let's add like word 1. Now let's add DD for details. So let's put a random text, forum 5. Now let's add another word, so DT word 2, and let's add another random text, so lorem 5. Now let's check the browser, and here we can see that we have a word and its description beneath it, because description list is extremely useful in key value pairs like dictionaries, or if you're gonna describe a machine like a computer or a car or something like that. Now let's go back to VS Code. One last thing, we can actually have multiple terms for one description, or vice versa. So let's try that. Here, I'm gonna add DT and word alternative, or here we're gonna add another detail. So let's call it alt detail. Now let's check the browser. Here we have 2 terms for one description, and here we have one term for 2 descriptions. First, we're gonna start with an h1, and inside we're gonna put some random text. Now let's check the browser. Now let's consider these 2 words here and here. Let's say we want these 2 words to be non-breaking. We want them always to be together. Now let's go back to VS Code, and here we're gonna add non-breaking space. So ampersand NBSP and the semicolon. Now let's go to the browser, and here we can see that our amit word went back to the second line. First, let's create a video tag, so video. Here in the source attributes, I'm gonna add intro.mp4, which is a file I added to the same folder with the index.html. Let's check the browser. Here we have a huge image. Let's go back and add width and height, 200 pixels, height 200 pixels. Let's go back to the browser, and here we can see it's just an image, and we're gonna fix this by adding an attribute controls, and it doesn't take anything. Let's go back to the browser, and here our welcome to daily tutorials. Today we're gonna start off with a brief introduction to HTML. Now let's go back to the browser. Let's add another attribute, which is autoplay, and this attribute will open the video when the page loaded. Now we're gonna add another attribute, which is loop. And this attribute will run the video on loops. One last thing for the video attribute, which is in case our video doesn't work, we can leave a message here. Let's say try again later. And audio is exactly the same thing as video. So audio, provide the source, is test.wav, and also provide the controls. We can also add the autoplay and loop attributes, but they are optional. Now let's check the browser. Welcome to daily tutorials. Today we're gonna start off with a brief introduction to our audio. On the right side, and it's working fine. Tables used to be used in two things: laying out our page and tables, but today it's only used in tables, and layout is CSS's responsibility. And today we're gonna create this table right here. And the first thing to know about tables, that they are row based. That means that first we're gonna create our first row, then the second, and so on and so on. Now let's move to VS Code and create our table. Here, let me get rid of this. First we're gonna start with table, and then we're gonna put TR for table row, and inside. And this is gonna be our table header, so th. I'm gonna put themes, win, lose, and draw. Next we're gonna populate our table, so again table row, and this time I'm gonna use td for table data, so td team 1. Then we're gonna put the results for the team 1, td, and how many wins team 1 had, so let's say 3. Then how many loses and how many draws. Now let's check the browser, and the first thing we notice that the header is bold. Now let's go back to populate the rest of the table. I'm gonna copy this one 4 times. I'm gonna change the names, so now let's check the browser. Now our table is missing a border, so let's add a border here in the table tag. I'm gonna add a border. Let's add one, let's say 1. Now let's go back to the browser, and here we can see that our table is just missing the caption, so let's go back. Let's add a caption here after table. Immediately we're gonna add caption, and let's write group A. Now let's go back to the browser, and here we have our caption centered above the table. And the last thing we're gonna do is, now we're gonna go back to VS Code, and we're gonna add semantics for our table. So, and this is just for the search engine. Like for example here, for the head table we can add above the tr tag, we can add head, and let's take it, cut it here and put here. And here in the browser we can check that it does nothing, but it just tells the browser that this is the head of our table. Also we have body and foot, which does the same thing. So first, div and span are different than all the elements we've seen so far. They both serve as containers where they group elements together. Second, div and span are used a lot in styling. And third, div is a block level element, while span is an inline element. And that's a subtle difference, which we're gonna see today. So let's pull up VS Code. So first, let's write div, and below it we're gonna put the span. Now let's check the browser, and here we can see that nothing has changed. So let's go back to VS Code, and here we're gonna start with a paragraph with random text, and also we're gonna have 2 images. We're gonna add the height and width. Let's copy this one. Now let's check the browser. Now let's add a div tag for the first image and see what happens. Now let's check the browser, and here the second image went to the next line, and that's what the div tag do. It takes the whole width of the screen. Now let's go back. Let's get rid of the div tag that we just added. And let's put the div tag for the second image. Now let's check the browser. And here nothing changed because the div tag also goes to the next line automatically. So let's go back to the VS Code and try the same thing with the span. And let's see the difference. Here I'm going to remove the div tags. And I'm going to add the span tag for the first image. Now let's check the browser. And here both images are in the same line. Let's try the same for the second image. Now let's check the browser. And here we have the same thing because the span tag doesn't go to the next line. And that's why it's an inline element. First, we're going to start with the form tag, so form. And this is going to be our container for the whole form. And there is the action attribute, which we're going to learn more about it when we get to the backend frameworks. Now let's start with the label tag, so label. And inside we're going to put username. Next we're going to have our input, so input. And here we can see the type is text. Now let's check the browser. And here's our label. And this is the box that we should put our text input. Now one thing we can notice that if I click on username, nothing is going to happen to the box. Now let's change that in VS Code. Now in the input element we're going to add an identification, which is ID. And here we're going to call it user. And for the label, the for attribute, we're going to put user. Now let's check the browser. And I'm going to click on username. And we can see that the label and the input are linked. Now let's go back to VS Code. Now let's add another field. So again, label. Let's call it password. And again, we're going to have the input tag, input. And for this time, we're going to change the text type to password, so password. Now let's check the browser. Here's our password field. Let's go back to VS Code and add div tags. So let's do div here for the first one, and another here. Now that looks better. Now let's try the password input box. So let's try it anything. So we can see here that we cannot see the words. It's replaced with dots. Now let's go back to the VS Code. And now we're gonna add some buttons. Let's start with the first one, so button. We're gonna add type attribute, so type. And there is two main types of attributes for the button. So submit. And here inside we're gonna add the label, so let's call it submit button. Now let's add a reset button, so button. Again type, but this time we're gonna put sub reset, and here we're gonna put reset button. Now let's check the browser, and here we have our two buttons. Now let's try to add some random text here and some random password, and I'm gonna click on the reset button. And both boxes are cleared. First, we're gonna put form, and inside this time we're gonna put label, and inside this label we're gonna put date, and we're gonna put the input tag inside. We're gonna change text to date, and we're gonna see the browser. So this is the default input. You can also that the format is month, day, then year, and that depends on your browser. Now let's try some dates. So now let's head to VS Code to add some attributes. First, we're gonna start with the value attribute, which is gonna be our placeholder date. So, and the format should be year. So let's put 2022. Next, I'm gonna put a dash, then month. Let's put May. Next, we're gonna put the day. So let's say 1. Now we're gonna add some more attributes. So let's say min, which is the date we can't go before. So, and it takes the same format. So here let's say 2019 dash, let's say it's May again, and first. Now we can also add max, same format again, max 26 dash May again, and let's say 01. Now let's check the browser. Here we have our default date, the 1st of May 2022. Now let's check our date limits. Now instead of 2022, I'm gonna go to 2016. I'm gonna hit enter. Now let's see our calendar. Here we can see that we can't go beyond 1 May 2019. Let's start with the 4. Next, we're gonna have label, and inside we're gonna put phone number, and we're gonna put input, and here we can change it to tel. Now let's check the browser. So this is our input box, and it has one problem, that it doesn't check for the validity of the phone number. Now let's try something. Let's put some letters. Now let's hit enter, and it doesn't validate the input. Now there is a solution. Now let's go back to VS Code, and here we're gonna add the pattern attribute, and the pattern attribute has a specific format. Now let's see how it works. First, let's say we are asking for 3 numbers between 0 and 9. We're gonna start with curly brackets. Now to the left, we're gonna put the minimum number, so it's 0, and then dash, then the maximum number, let's say it's 8. Now outside the brackets, we're gonna add another curly brackets, and here we're gonna specify how many numbers we want. Now let's say 3. Then we're gonna put a dash. Here we're gonna ask for like 4 numbers, let's say between 2 and 9, and we're gonna add the curly braces, so 4. Now as you can see, there is space right here. You should always take it out, and you can also take the dash here out if you want, but we're gonna keep it. So let's go back to browser. Now let's try random thing. Let's hit enter, and here we have the message, please match the requested format. Now let's try our format. So first we have 3 numbers between 0 and 8, so let's say 5, 4, 8, and here we're obliged to add the dash. Now we have 4 numbers between 2 and 9. Now let's put 5, 8, 2 9s. Now let's hit enter, and it works. Now let's try a wrong number. Let's say 3 zeros and 4 sevens. Now let's enter, and here we can see that it's not accepting the new number. Now let's go back to VS Code to add one last thing. Now can actually, for the tail attribute, we can add a placeholder. So placeholder, just to tell the user the format. So let's put 3 numbers between 0 and 8, and 4 numbers between 2 and 9. Now let's go back to the browser, and here is our placeholder. First we're gonna start with the form, and then inside we're gonna have a label, and inside we're gonna have color, input, and we're gonna change text to color. Now let's take this out, and let's check the browser. Now this is our color palette. That's right here. Here we can add the RGB colors and change them, as you see right here. Also we have the Hsl Colors, which stands for hue, saturation, and lightness. And also we have the hex model. Now in VS Code, we're gonna add another attribute, which is value, so we can set the default color. So value, and here we must put it in hex format. So let's put a green color. So number sign, 2 zeros, 8,000. Now let's check the browser. Here we have our green color as a default. First, we're gonna have our form. Inside, we're gonna have paragraph. Paragraph tag. Let's say, what sports do you watch? Now we're gonna add label. Now here, let's say football. And we're gonna add an input tag, so input. And here we're gonna put a checkbox. Now let's add another one, so let's copy this. Let's change football to cricket. Now let's get the browser. And here we have our two checkboxes. Now one thing we can add is to make boxes checked by default. So let's go back to VS Code and let's add an attribute called checked. Let's add here too, so check. Now let's go back to the browser. And here our boxes are checked by default. First, we're gonna have our form, label, input. We're gonna get rid of this, and we're gonna change this to email. Let's add our label, email. Now let's check the browser. Now let's test the validation, so let's put anything. And it's refused, but let's add an at and try again. Let's add at anything. .com. Let's try this time, and it passes. Let's say we want a specific type of email. Let's say Gmail. Now we're gonna go back to VS Code. I'm gonna add the pattern here. Now here we're gonna put dot. Then we're gonna add the plus. Then let's say we want a Gmail account, so at gmail.com. Now let's go back to the browser. Now let's try anything again. At yahoo.com. Here we can see it's not working. Now let's try gmail.com. And here we can see that it's working. Now we're gonna add some more attributes. First, we're gonna start with the length attribute. So minimum length. We can set it to 10, for example. And we're gonna add also a maximum. So max length, let's say 60. One more thing we can add is title. Let's say, please enter a Gmail account. Now let's check the browser. Here, if we hover over the box, you can see the message. Now let's go back and add a final attribute. It's gonna be the placeholder, and let's put it user at gmail.com. Now let's check the browser, and here's our placeholder. First, we're gonna start with the form, and we're gonna have a label. Here we're gonna put upload profile picture. So now we're gonna put our input tag, and here we're gonna put file. Now let's check the browser. Now let's put choose file on the next line. So I'm gonna use the br tag. Here we have our choose file. Now let's click on it, and here are our files. Now let's click on any one of them. So here we have our picture. Now we're gonna add an attribute to input type file. We're gonna add the accept attribute, which is gonna be responsible for which files are allowed to be uploaded. And here there are many ways to allow certain types. Let's start with the first one. Let's start with image flash, and here we can add like PNG if we want. Now we can add more than one, and we're gonna separate them with comma. We're gonna put audio, for example, slash again. We're gonna put mp3 and comma again, and here we can add also videos, flash, and we can say like mp4. So this is the types that's allowed to be uploaded. Now there is another way to do this, so let's get rid of this. You can also use the format, so you can put a period, PNG, always add a comma between them, so you can also put period, JPEG. You can also add a PDF, so always comma, then period and PDF. Now let's say you want an image, but you will accept any format. So what you do is put an image, slash, and star. You can do the same for audio or video, so you can do audio, slash, star. Now let's try this by just accepting PNG file. So image, slash, PNG. Now let's try this. Let's go to the browser, choose a file, and here I used to have another JPEG file inside this folder, but it's gone now. This is a PNG file. You can click on it. Now let's go back to the VS Code. We're gonna add another important attribute. We're gonna add a multiple attribute, and we're gonna take off this part, and let's check the browser. Here you can see that we're seeing every type of files. Now let's check if we can put two files here. Here we have two files, and as you see here we can see two files. First we're gonna start with a form. Next we're gonna have a paragraph tag, and here I'm gonna write how many times did Brazil win the World Cup. Next we're gonna have a label, and next we're gonna have an input tag, so input. And here instead of text we're gonna put radio, and we're gonna copy this 2 more times. And for the first one I'm gonna put 3 times. The second I'm gonna put 5 times, and for the last one I'm gonna put 7 times. Now let's check the browser. Now let's try to click on them. So, and here as you can see, actually all of them can be checked, and if you want just one answer, the only solution is to go back to input, and here we're gonna add name. Let's say Brazil. Let's copy this and add it for the other two. Now let's go back to the browser, and here as you can see we're only able to select one. Now one last thing we can add is, in case we want one of them to be checked by default, we only need to add an attribute checked. So let's say 5th one. So now let's go back to the browser. Here you can see that 5 times is checked by default. First we're gonna have our for. So the field set element is used to divide the input into sections. So let's start with field set. Next we're gonna have legend, and here we're gonna divide our input into 2 sections, mandatory and optional. Mandatory. Next we're gonna have 3 input text. So let me copy this. Now let's copy all of this. Now let's change mandatory to optional. And now let's check the browser. Here we have our mandatory fields, and below it we have our optional fields. First we're gonna have a form, and inside the form we're gonna have a label, and for the label we're gonna put best player, and in the for attribute we're gonna put best, and below that we're gonna have an input, and I'm gonna get rid of this. Now we're gonna have an ID, it's gonna be best, and to have the data list we need to have the list attribute in the input, so list, and here we're gonna call it the best player. Now below that, I'm gonna add the data list. And inside the data list, we're gonna have an ID. And the ID needs to match the attribute list in the input, so I'm gonna copy this and paste it here. Now inside the data list, to provide the list of choices, we need to provide the option element, so option. In the value, we're gonna put the first one, we're gonna put Messi. I'm gonna copy this. And we're gonna change the second one to Ronaldo. And the third one to Robert. Now let's check the browser. And here, if I hover over, and here if I hover over the box, I can see an arrow, so I'm gonna click on the arrow. And here are options. Now let's select Messi, and Messi is written. Now the difference between the data list element and the select element is here you are actually given the user the option to enter a custom answer. So here we can get rid of it from Messi, and we can put our own choice like Suarez, for example. And that's how data list works. First, you can use the details element to provide information for users that they can open and close on demand. First, let's start with details. Next, we need the summary elements, so summary. And here we're gonna provide a title for our content, so let's say team's information. Next, we're gonna add a paragraph. Let's put a random paragraph. Now let's check the browser. Here we have the title provided in the summary. Now we can open just by clicking on the arrow on the left, and we can close it back. Now one last thing, details are closed by default, and we can change that just by going to the details tag and add the open attribute. Now let's check the browser, and it's open right now by default. First, the figure element is used a lot in news websites, either to provide more information about the picture or to credit the person who took it. So let's start with figure. Next, we're gonna add an image. And in my folder, I have an image called realmadrid.png, so real. And to add the information, we need another element called big caption. So, and here I'm gonna write Real Madrid logo. Now let's check the browser, and here's our image, and this is the thick caption. First, the meta element is responsible for providing information to the browser and the search engines. Now we're gonna start with the HTML, and here we're gonna choose HTML5, and this is the boilerplate that the VS Code provides. Here first we can see that meta char set UTF-8. This is basically the character encoding, which means that any language can be used in this page. The second line here, the meta HTTP equiv. This line is not really important. It just provides compatibility for all the Internet Explorer browsers. And on the third line, we have meta name viewport. Actually, this is extremely important. This line is telling the browser to adjust the width of the page to the width of the device you're using. As you can see here in content width equal device width. Initial scale is 1. And now we're gonna add our own meta elements. We're gonna choose that few examples because there is a lot of meta tags you can use. Now we're gonna start with the meta name, and here we're gonna say description. And for the content, here we're gonna actually try to describe our website. Now let's check an example from the internet. Now let's head to the FIFA website. And here's the description meta tag. Now let's go back to the VS Code. We can add anything we want here. Now let's say our website is all about football. And that's it. Now we're gonna add another important meta tag, which is the keywords meta tag, which is responsible for keywords in our for our website. So name, keywords, and here content, and you can add as many as you want, but you always need to put a comma between them. Let's say like football, comma, Ronaldo, etc, etc. The third meta tag I'm gonna add is the robots meta tag. So meta name robots, content, you can put non-index, and this means that search engine should not index this file. You could do that for many reasons actually. Maybe this is the link that takes you to your dashboard for your website and you don't want anyone to see it. Now you can also add no follow, and this is telling the search engine not to index any link inside the web page. Now for the last meta tag I'm gonna add is the refresh meta tag. So quiv refresh, and in content we're gonna provide for how many seconds, and in content we're gonna provide after how many seconds it's gonna refresh. So we can put 5 here, for example. Now there is you can add also a website in case you want to redirect after 5 seconds. So here we can put like google.com or something. This is gonna be the last video in this course, and it's gonna be about how to add a favicon to your website. So let's get started. To add a favicon, I'm gonna go to the head section and I'm gonna add a link element. Here I'm gonna choose favicon, and the href attribute is gonna be the address to our file. So I have a Skype icon in the same folder as the index.html, so it's called favicon.png. Now let's check the browser. So let me zoom into the tab, and there is the Skype icon next to the title element. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and see you next time.